I kind of wanted to take the opportunity first to say thank you for joining me in this interview. On my paternity leave, I recently decided to start kind of an online YouTube channel
Mhm.
where I have the opportunity to interview people like you and get to learn one on one, but then also I think continue our mission of trying to teach product management to those who are here in Japan and develop that community. I do that through the Product Tank event, and you yourself do that through the Chief Product organization. And so I wanted to take the opportunity to learn a little bit more about your background because in terms of product management experience, you are significantly my senior. And then kind of break down into how you see the difference between product management in the US, where you previously worked before, and in Japan now, and then going into how that led to your experience starting the Chief Product Officer organization.
Great. Thank you, Jason, for having me. I'm excited to share any of my experience with you.
If we can start with a little bit of your background, like how did you get into product management, and seeing, you worked at places like Adobe and Cisco, and you really climbed the product management ladder at Salesforce. What led you into product management, and what kept you interested in that all the way up until where you are now?
Great. So yes, my name is Wakamatsu, and I'm currently a venture partner at DCM. We're a venture capital firm. And so my current role is to work with companies that we invest in to help them grow faster and scale in a scalable way. And so I use a lot of my experience in operations, working in product, and share my experience with the companies that we work with. My first career really was software development. So I've been in software development for 23 years, and I got my start on the engineering side. So I joined an engineering team for a product called Direct. And I spent 8 years in a couple of different teams. We also built Flashlight, but a lot of the Macromedia products on the engineering side. And then Adobe acquired Macromedia.
Oh, okay.
And during that process, I made the transition from engineering to product. And then from there, I worked in product management for 15 years, like roughly 15 years. It started off at Adobe. So the first product I built was Adobe Photoshop Express and Adobe Premiere Express. So we built some of the first iPhone applications for Adobe, the Photoshop application for iPhone and Android and Windows Phone back then. And then from there, I worked at Cisco working on hardware and software. So building software for a consumer video product. From there, went to Salesforce and went completely from multimedia video to SaaS, B2B, and spent 9 years there with building product. And also from there, I went to more of the go-to-market side. So I had the opportunity to work with bringing the products and scaling them in Japan. Right. And then I spent a couple of years at a startup working on the product management. So that's sort of
and
my...
is that what...
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to say, is that what then interested you now in terms of DCM Ventures, where you get the opportunity to work together with startups and really bring your experience to their day-to-day?
Exactly. As I thought that, being in Japan and with a vibrant startup community, thought it would be a great opportunity to, rather than just working with one company, give the opportunity to work with multiple companies. I thought that would be a really exciting experience, and it has.
Well, I will admit it must be incredible to get the opportunity to see, small, very energetic teams saying, hey, we want to tackle this problem. And then you saying, okay, well, this is how you should do that. And this is how we can really crystallize your idea and make that into something incredible. And like you said, the startup community here in Tokyo, I think it's really getting on its feet. So it's an exciting time to be involved.
Right. And in that respect, I think what we as a venture partner really try to do is say, from our experience, you can choose path A, and path A will get you faster with these drawbacks.
Right.
Path B take you a little bit longer, but it'll give you these drawbacks. I've had experience doing both.
Yep.
And so here's what we recommend that you do. And ultimately the decision is yours as the entrepreneur and the company. But really it's to help to sort of go through the different opportunities and the potential results of those and give the
and help them weigh the opportunity cost.
exactly.
I think having the ability to kind of get that bird's eye view and to see, how do we bring this product to market? How do we better communicate with the customers? All of that comes from your years of experience. So I wanted to ask, you started as a software engineer and then you transitioned into product management. Was that a smooth transition for you, or was this a transition where you were taking on a lot more responsibility, especially when the company that you're working for was acquired?
So that's a great question. I would say that back when I became a PM 15 years ago, or longer, 17 years ago, the concept of product management really, it still wasn't very popular. And especially in a company like Adobe, it was not an easy path to take. I think one of the reasons why is because the way we build software is very different now from back in the day. So Adobe was a shrink wrap software company that built software that's distributed on CDs, and we were just getting into the online and iOS. And I think that shift gave a lot more opportunities for people to get into the product management organization. And I was able to make that transition at that time. And so, yeah, so it wasn't easy, but the timing was perfect.
And that brought you then transitioning into, through Cisco, to software as a service, which is an entirely different model. I wanted to ask, what was your experience trying to facilitate software as a service uniquely here in Japan?
So that's a great question. Software as a service in Japan, I think one of the initial difficulties that we had was that you can buy services, and then with Salesforce, for example, you have the ability to customize it. There's companies like ServiceNow and whatnot that give you the ability to customize. The benefit of customization is you can build the product the exact way you want. But there's also benefits to using the non-customized version, the default version of the product. And the benefit of that is that you get free upgrades to the product without having to do it. And as those updates come pre-tested and performance and scale and everything should work perfectly. And so I think when I first came to Japan, I saw that a lot of the implementations of our products were highly customized, which was a little unique to Japan. And I think, so that was one of the big differences. I think a part of my role was to try and share what the value was of using the default product. So I worked on a product called Sales Cloud, which was a product that you could use out of the box. And our goal was to have more people take advantage of all of the innovation that we're building, and that was included license with that product. And I think that was a big difference between working as product manager in the US versus working on the go-to-market side in Japan.
This might be a little bit out of your wheelhouse, but I'm curious on your perspective of maybe why Japan had so many customized software services. So you get a big client saying, well, we have this problem, let's find a solution. You find something that fits 80%. And what is it then about maybe Japan or the corporate culture here that would then say, okay, let's try customize the last 20 rather than changing the internal structure of the company to better then fit the software product that's available?
That's a great question. And I believe it has a lot to do with the way a lot of enterprise software was built in Japan prior to a lot of the SaaS tools. And so you have a lot of system integrators that would come and build these applications for these companies. And the thought for a lot of these companies was that we don't want to put a big disruption for the people who are using the application to have to learn another new product. And so in order to do that, a lot of implementations of enterprise software were, here's the current version that was designed 10 years ago with 10-year-old UI, and we want you to replace it with a modern version, but we want it to look exactly like it did 10 years ago. And in the exact same font, the exact same color, so that they wouldn't even know that they're using a new product. And our goal was to say, hey, this was designed 10 years ago. technology has gone leaps and bounds in those last 10 years.
So
We
it's
can
worth
make
retraining.
Exactly. The amount of training you're going to spend is going to be a lot less. So why don't you use this new product? But we have this manual that we created 5 years ago that cost us that everyone learned in order to use this product, and we don't want that to go to waste. So I think a lot of that happened. But I think at the same time, the users in Japan were changing as well, right? So people were getting used to using applications like Facebook, or like a service like Facebook that continuously improved. iPhone applications that were designed for the new touch UI and just a better experience in general. And so slowly we were able to show the value of these better, newer products and push them towards that direction. I think actually one of the key drivers at the time in 2016 was AI. I think we're seeing that again with ChatGPT and DALL-E, but the fact that you would be able to make recommendations on what people should do based on the way people use their applications was very novel. And I think Japan really liked that idea. And so, but one of the challenges was that in order to get that, you would have to use the sales application that was designed as a sales application rather than platform that was customized to become a sales application. So in order to get a lot of the AI, you would need to use the default product. I think that changed the view of a lot of companies.
I will say I forgot the name of the guy who does ChatGPT, Sam
Altman?
Yeah, Sam Altman, he was here in Japan talking with Kishida about, what can ChatGPT do, or what is the potential of AI. Do you think the first time we had the opportunity to chat, you had said that Japan is behind Silicon Valley in terms of the way that we do product management? I want to dig in a little bit as to why that's the case. And do you still feel like that is true now? And if so, do you think that we're in a position to ride this ChatGPT wave to see, what can it unlock?
So I would say the first part, has product management in Japan, has it continued to evolve and grow and get better? I think definitely. Compared to when I came to Japan, like roughly 7 years ago, it's a whole different landscape. But I think there are still limitations to the growth in Japan. And it's actually it's almost related to, I think, the limitations of ChatGPT in Japan, for example.
Okay.
So like the way ChatGPT works is it learns off of all the publicly available information that's out there in the Japanese language, right?
Yeah.
So if you ask a question in Japanese versus if you ask the same question in English, the answers you're going to get back are going to be much more complete in English than they are in Japanese, just because there's a lot more information out there.
Right.
So in a similar way, I think product management in Japan is kind of hampered by the same thing where there's less product managers. There's less people in engineering, less people in technology. And so that information that's out there, there's just a lot less. So it's not that the quality is necessarily bad, but since there's just not as much information or not enough people out there, it's harder for that information to be distributed and used. And so, for example, you would find a handful of companies where they have one product manager, and that product manager was converted from an engineer or sales or UX, and they're the company's first product manager, right? And in that case, they are product manager, but they don't have that much experience, and so therefore, what they learn is going to be what they learn from books or TV or YouTube or whatever it is, and therefore that experience is going to be a little bit different, and that growth pattern is going to be a little different. So I think that is. And I think a lot of it is just the absolute number of people, the amount of information. It's still, the scale is much smaller.
One thing that I found quite interesting, so I've been trying to interact with these sort of Japanese language-based PM communities here. And one thing that I found interesting was a lot of the times there would be Medium articles that people would share in the chat. And it's something that was published, by someone who shares it in English, and then they simply translate it and say, hey guys, this is worth reading. And I think that's one of the opportunities, because if you look at the internet, half of the internet is in English. And so you have the ability for Japanese product managers to kind of leapfrog forward by translating what's available, like high quality stuff, then into Japanese and going from there. But it's been really impressive to see the shift to companies approaching problems in a product led way.
Yeah,
One
I think it's definitely been that shift.
One thing that I found interesting. So I was interviewing for Free, the software as a service company that tries to help small businesses with their accounting. And I remember during the interview process, I was applying to be a product manager, and they had shared this whole, deck saying we're product led, you're the product manager, you're in the core. And it was really impressive to see a company that's not small. I wouldn't call Free a startup by any sense, but it's also not, massive enterprise. But to see, that mid-sized company shifting into a product-led way when it comes to software, that made me think, wow, we've really moved forward in terms of implementing product management as a role when it comes to software.
For sure. I think Free is a great example where they've really embraced the sort of agile and independent product teams building products at that scale at great speed. And they've gone from not just accounting, but to HR and to you can start your own company, all the paperwork needs to be done. They've kind of really gone the whole spectrum of running a small business. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I tried to use their product, but I can't read Japanese, so that's my limitation. But no, they do have an incredible lineup, and it made me hopeful, to see this company where during the interview I was chatting with one of the product managers, and he was saying his wife works as a sort of Japanese conversation part-time teacher, but she works individually as freelance, and seeing her issue with filing taxes and sorting out all of this paperwork is what inspired him to join Free and to really work together with their team. And so when I see that initiative and that drive for those who want to then do product within Free, I was quite captivated. And I think it's a potential that's starting to really develop, especially if you're looking at the startup community in Japan. I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I see on LinkedIn quite a lot saying, oh, Japan is decades behind in terms of startups. We don't have the legal framework in order to help startups. But at the same time, there's a real energy. I find in Tokyo, there's a real drive for people to say, okay, well, these are the problems we see. How do we move that forward? And so I kind of wanted to take the opportunity to jump from your views of product management in Japan now to the CPO organization. So you've been doing that for 2 years now. Can you tell me the backstory a little bit of to why you started the CPO organization?
Yeah, for sure. But before we do talk about that, I just wanted to share one thing that, and DCM, like you did mention the startup ecosystem. I did want to talk a little bit about that. And one thing that was exciting and really for me was that DCM was one of the first investors for Free. Actually. So
okay, I didn't know that.
Invested in Free when they were and I think the growth that you explained, I think it was a great partnership between the two companies, and that's sort of what led me here, is that I thought it'd be exciting to be able to try and help build more of those type of companies. So that's one thing. Another thing related to the startups is that I think that there is a lot of excitement and opportunity, but then I think what you mentioned was really interesting was that there's a lot of all these like legal hurdles, and I think a lot of the startups in Japan are they're unique to Japan because there's so many legal hurdles, or the way things are very, how should I say, like there's a lot of structure behind it. And I think there's a lot of structure, there's a lot of opportunity for disruption.
Right.
And I think that's where companies like Free come in and they say, hey, there's an opportunity, because there's just so much work you need to do to just start a company, or just to do your taxes, or just to file whatever it is, that there's a business opportunity. I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing a lot of great startups in Japan. And then now to lead into, and thank you for the lead into the Japan CPO Association.
Of course.
So my initial thought was, when I was back working at Salesforce, I had the opportunity to work with companies that Salesforce invested in through their corporate venture capital arm,
right?
Including also Free, Sun, and some other great companies. And as a product leader in Japan, I was able to share some of the things that Salesforce did to make their product development more efficient and more just faster, better, stronger, more scalable.
Yeah.
And as I was doing that, as I was sharing that with these product leaders at these companies, they're like, this is great. We should share this more widely within Japan. And then, of course, but having worked all my life in the US, I really didn't have the network or the ability to really sort of get my voice out there. And that's when I met Old Sun, who was at Sansan at the time, who said, hey, I'll help you find people that can help spread this out. And so he was able to get product leaders from Free and Sansan and Smart HR and MediPay and to join us to help spread that word. And so that's how the Japan CPO Association existed, and really kind of what we touched on earlier about there's so few product managers, and a lot of product managers had very limited information in Japanese.
Right.
And we thought by taking some of the content that was out there in the US and translating it into Japanese, that we would be able to provide a lot of value. Another aspect of Japan that's different from the US culture that we thought was important for the Japan CPO Association is that a lot of people tend to stay at jobs for much longer than they do in the US. And I think that's great for a lot of things, but at the same time, it hampers a lot of things. So one of the things I think it hampers is the spread of information. So if you work in product management at different companies, what you'll see is the way the companies do product management evolves over time.
Right.
Because you get someone that used to work at Apple or someone that used to work at Facebook, someone that used to work at Google, and things work better the way they are. Some things work better with a new way of thinking. And as those teams grow and evolve and companies at different scale, you learn what works and what doesn't. You get the ability to try different things. And I think that doesn't happen as much in Japan. And because it doesn't happen, we thought, well, maybe we need to sort of get those different ideas out there just so that people can start thinking about it and see if they want to.
Now, I did want to ask, so as part of the Japan CPO organization, part of the message that you try to share is also there's an interest. There's an interest in product management. Now, so generally we try to organize these small social events and casual gatherings that give the people opportunity to chat with each other in the community. And we don't necessarily target leaders, these product leaders and thought leaders in Japan. But I think the impact from involving CPOs can have a really big impact. How do I say, you really expand the capacity for them to spread the message and to say, hey, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, how we're doing it. I'm curious, do you feel like that message and that opportunity will really start shaking the larger companies in Japan, such as Mitsubishi or Mitsui or Sumitomo? Like, I'm wondering, do you see product management spreading into the larger organizations that, like you say, also don't have people that move in and out a lot, and so they become very insulated?
Mm-hmm. Yes and no. I think a lot of these organizations, the way they're structured, it is really hard to bring new things. But some of the companies are doing it. So like NTT, for example, NTT Data, they are very much, they're really embracing the way, sort of the agile way of building software and building companies that way. At the same time, they also have a corporate venture capital arm where they're also investing in companies. And so I think they're doing something very smart. I think it's like trying to do it internally and then also doing it externally as well. I think obviously we did mention this, but there's a lot of process in Japanese business. And I think that some things you're able to do and some things are just going to be too hard to do. And it's easier to do it outside of the organization. And I think that's why corporate venture capital is, I think corporate venture capital is huge. And I think one of the reasons why is because of all of the restrictions and sort of rules and regulations that a lot of these larger companies have.
So then they aren't then restricted by their internal, let's say, bureaucracy by exploring corporate venture capital.
Yep. So they can invest in these companies that are trying to build what they're trying to build, and then
Right.
either acquire or just leave the companies as they are and kind of use that as their business arm for
Right.
that business need.
Because from, at least from the outside, I think one of the challenges when it comes to product management is the role itself is not as clear defined, right? And what the day-to-day of a product manager might be that's involved in sales and sort of go-to-market strategy is very different to a product manager that's responsible for machine learning and how do we create these large language models within the companies. And so the title itself, product manager, is kind of a catch-all term, which to an extent then can be challenging, I imagine, for larger companies to say, we don't like amorphous figures. This is your role and this is your responsibility, but that is hard to really capture with a title. I'm wondering, do you think, and this is, I guess, just more of a personal question, but do you think the term product manager is vague to the sense that you start losing the sense of what it is, or are there core product management sort of fundamentals that everyone needs to know and carry throughout their experience?
So I think, so to answer your first question, the term, they don't use product manager, they call them PMs. But PMs often in Japanese companies are actually project managers, and they're not product managers. So I think they're right there's a big gap. And then in order to try and solve that problem, some people here will call product managers PDMs to try and differentiate those roles. And I think for a lot of people, they don't really know the difference between a product manager and a project manager. I think it's roughly the same.
Right.
I think that is a big challenge because the way I think product management is seen sort of globally is that ultimately you're responsible for the product. You are ultimately it. You know what? We're not getting people to buy it. In a way, you're responsible, right? As a product manager, you don't necessarily have to solve the problem, but it should be on the top of your mind. So, as a product manager, even though I'm not building the marketing, I'm not building the website, I'm not building the emails, I'll often look at them to see, is the messaging for the product the correct messaging and the most up-to-date message? Because the product continually evolves, right? We're in this SaaS and app-based economy. Our products keep changing. The same, what it could do 6 months ago and what it could do 6 months from now are going to be two totally different things. And so messaging needs to always change. So even though I'm not going to write the copy or I'm not going to create the website, it's my responsibility to make sure that it's reflecting what the product is now. And the same thing with sales. If my sales team is using a pitch deck that's using screenshots from a year ago, then I have a problem, right?
Taken straight from Figma. It's beautiful.
Right. So then, even though I'm not responsible for the actual sales, I'm still responsible for the product. So it should be my responsibility, or it is my responsibility, to go talk to sales leaders and say, hey, can I see your demo script? I want to see how my product's being demoed. And you know what? 5 of these features, you can do these all better with these 3 features now. So I'd love for you to change the demo this way. And that could help grow your sales. There's a lot of things that you can do and I think this is kind of comes back to like, ultimately, what is the responsibility of the product manager? And I think it comes down to you're responsible for the product. So for whatever aspect it is, whether it's adoption, attrition, sales, marketing, you're ultimately it's your product, it's your baby, and you need to do whatever it is to make that a better experience for your business counterparts, whether they're trying to sell it or they're trying to help with adoption or stop attrition or whatever it is.
And I think this is one of the incredible things, at least from my perspective, what's happening now is you have small to medium-sized companies that are saying, hey, we need people who take ownership over the product. So like this is the final thing. Yes, I'm not the one making it. Yes, I'm not the one that's communicating directly to the customer, but you have people within the organization that have the ability to make decisions and they bring their opinion and their justifications for why we should do A instead of B, and then taking ownership of that and kind of sharing that around. But I'm wondering, that that gets challenging when you look at maybe a larger company that has a more rigid bureaucratic structure. So they aren't prioritizing maybe what the product needs are, but they're putting more effort into sales communication and marketing channels. So I'm curious, do you see a shift within the B2C space, but also the B2B space of let's focus on the product, let's focus on the thing that we're making and how do we make that better, which will then sort of cascade into marketing and cascade into eventual revenue.
Sorry, so that's for the companies, the mid-sized or the larger
Yes.
companies are going towards that direction. I would say, yes, I think they're definitely trying to do that. I think that is the goal.
Right.
I think everyone is sort of recognizing that the sort of the business landscape, the way you build and distribute products is changing. So I think people are definitely making that shift and realizing that there are things that they need to change now, like the way, like I give the example of the manual and kind of like how that happened, but it still really does exist. And so if that process is if your software still requires a manual to use it, then you're way behind the times. Right? So I think if the product can change and be a better product that's more easier to use, and hopefully you don't need a manual anymore. The marketing can be simpler, more effective. I think there's a lot of things that are changing, and I think slowly businesses are definitely adapting.
Then I wanted to take the opportunity to ask, looking at software companies, you've got really big players from overseas that have made their way into Japan. I think Salesforce is an example. Wolt, the food delivery app, is another example where they've done incredible work competing with Uber Eats here. I'm kind of curious, do you see, or maybe top of mind, do you have any examples of where Japanese software or Japanese companies are starting to expand outside of Japan's borders?
Great question. And that's a tough question. I think it has to do a lot with the types of businesses that are successful in Japan.
Right.
So the types of startups that we've seen that are successful in Japan tend to tackle a problem that is endemic to Japan.
Right.
So like, for example, Sansan, which is a lot about, scanning and maintaining information about business people that you meet through their business cards, is culturally related to Japan.
Very much so, yes.
Same with Free. The reason why Free exists is because globally there's TurboTax, and you can't export TurboTax to Japan because the accounting laws and the tax laws are very different.
Right.
And I think a lot of the really successful Japanese B2B companies, it's difficult for them to go global because the reason why they came to exist is very different, or what makes them unique and successful. And then there's companies like Mercari, which is very successful in Japan, but has separate sets of challenges globally. I think there's amazing things about Mercari that my wife uses it quite often, and you can do things that you can send it anonymous. You can buy and sell anonymous.
Yep.
And also it works. The distribution is fantastic and amazing. You can walk into a convenience store.
I think Kuroneko gets some credit for that.
Kuroneko and Yamato and all those guys, but it's that integration that Mercari built, right?
Right.
So that's where I believe the value of a company like Mercari comes. But it's a lot harder to take that same concept and do it in a country that's much, much larger, has a very different distribution system.
Right.
And to be successful in the same way is difficult. One of the companies that we're investing in right now, called Caddy, is now going into the US market. And Caddy, what Caddy does is you scan your CAD drawings, and then those drawings are then companies that want to build those will match the best companies to build that actual piece and just that piece. And so they're now going into the US market, and hopefully they'll be successful.
Yes, but no, that's true. I think the Japanese market can be seen to be very unique. And so a lot of the sort of startups that are doing really well, like you say, are developing within this certain ecosystem. There's a lot of healthcare initiatives that are being done, but that's made specifically for the Japanese healthcare economy and things like that. So that's actually a very fair point, because we I mean, Japan's quite a big market, quite a big economic market, and so you have a lot of companies that go, we can primarily focus on Japan, which is also why you don't get services translated into English, which maybe for the 2-3 million people that live in Japan that don't speak Japanese can be rather frustrating. But where because one thing I was reflecting on was, like, I'm also half Dutch, and in the Netherlands, it's a small country to the point where everyone speaks English, and as being part of the EU, sort of all business is primarily cross-border. And this is something that I learned from the head of product at Wolt, who it started, I think, in Sweden, but their first premise was, we're going to be a global company. And so they streamlined their sort of localization procedures and their product deployment to the point where then they're now in 19 countries really quickly. And it's impressive to see that, but then it's also clear that the problem that they're targeting is different, which I think you see here in Japan, especially, like you said, with Mercari. The timing was perfect, I think, and the growth that Mercari's had is incredible, but it's also very much in collaboration with the Kuroneko, with Yamato, and services like that allow Mercari to be as big as it is.
Yeah, I think that's great point. I think that, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
That's all right. So then let me bring it back a little bit to your Chief Product Officer organization. I'm curious, as part of running your annual conference, where you have the opportunity to have these Chief Product Officers come and tell their story a little bit, do you also see, like, how do you see the job landscape or the hiring landscape when it comes to those who are trying to get into product management, or those coming from overseas? So, for example, you said for a lot of companies, they'll bring someone from sales, or they'll bring someone from software engineering who's showing promise and taking more responsibility and saying, hey, we want to tap you as a product manager. But I'm curious, how do you see the job market evolving based on your experience running the Chief Product Officer organization?
So we've seen the demand for product managers in Japan is definitely growing. There's not enough. And I think the challenge is it's not enough because, as you mentioned, a lot of people don't speak Japanese. And a lot of the Japanese don't speak English. So even though there's a great demand, it's really hard to fill that demand.
Right.
So that's why we're seeing. And so I think that in terms of demand, yes, it's growing. And also another thing that I'm really happy about is we've seen that the average income for product management in Japan is also growing.
Right.
So compared to over the last 6-7 years, we've seen it grow, I think, percentage-wise, like 20-30% in some cases.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's fantastic. Like on par with engineering. I think Japan engineering was, I think, much higher than product in the past. Now it's about the same. So I think
part of. Sorry, I don't mean to jump in. I wanted to ask, is part of that trying to be competitive on sort of a global scale?
I think a lot of that has to do with being competitive on a global scale, but it also has to do with the fact the fact that technology for these startups is seen as more of a viable, and you don't have to, take a pay cut necessarily to work in a startup.
Right.
Anymore. It's not like like previously it was, yes, you're going to take a pay cut because you're going to hopefully get some equity, and that equity will be worth, down the line. I think the economy, the landscape has changed from just that to we can now sort of at least pay equally to what engineers pay.
No, I think. Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, because and just the other thing is, I think the wages for engineers has also increased. So I think it's not just that products caught up, but engineering's gone up and product has gone up as well.
Because when you have a population that is slowly decreasing, and yes, you do have very enthusiastic people who are involved in tech, but at the same time, the pool is the pool of available talent is shrinking. And so trying to reach overseas, but then also become competitive, I think is a really big avenue for growth. Looking at Mercari, for example, they opened a office in, I think, Hyderabad. In Bangalore. So they opened a new office in Bangalore where they're saying, India has incredible tech talent, incredible software engineers, and we want to tap on that talent and try bring, what they can then make into Japan. I'm curious if, just because I'm not sure, but I'm wondering, is that happening more to the sense that we need to scale up, and so English and being able to communicate with those overseas starts to become more and more important?
For sure. I think so. I think you're seeing a lot of companies now invest in engineering globally. Philippines, Vietnam, India. And, as you mentioned, there is a great, there's so much that needs to be built, but there's just not enough product managers to do it. I think the one key in order to make that successful, though, is that there needs to be an infrastructure in place that where someone could lead that engineering team in English. So there still is that gap that the product manager will most likely, or the engineering managers will most likely have to speak both Japanese and English.
Right.
You don't need everyone to speak Japanese, which is a lot easier.
No, that's true. You need like a really good conduit between the two teams and kind of bring that together. It's kind of frustrating, like when I was looking for jobs before joining Mercari, and everywhere says, yeah, you need N2 or N1 Japanese. I'm like, that's so, I get it. I understand why, but it can be frustrating and quite limiting for those who are trying to move into sort of the Japanese workforce.
Yeah.
But that's not isolated just to product managers. I think that's true of kind of the entire swath of the economy. If people are trying to come in, but you can't speak the language, you kind of just hit a big language barrier and kind of get stuck.
Yeah. Hopefully that will change. Maybe with ChatGPT.
Yes, I mean, I've used ChatGPT to translate emails, and it's quite impressive what it can do. But it doesn't capture my, how do I say, when responding, my Japanese is kind of broken in an email. And so when I send an email through ChatGPT, it's too perfect and it throws people off.
So hey,
it's like that.
Yeah, it's
a bit too good, yeah. Which, as far as complaints go, like I'm okay with that one.
Nice.
So, so far I think we've covered quite a lot of topics. And one thing that I kind of wanted to drive down into is I'm been a product manager for 3 years now. And even though I'm currently on paternity leave, I'm trying to take the time to skill up a little bit and learn a little bit more about product management. And you had said, oftentimes the people who get into product management in Japan are generally done laterally within a company, pulling someone from one role to another. What kind of advice or what kind of recommendation would you give to people in those situations? And then separately to those who are kind of new grads that get slotted into product management and kind of get them on their feet?
I would say the best ideal situation is when you have a mentor within your organization that you can ask questions, talk to. I think product management as a role is it's kind of it's a solitary role. Right. You're on your own. You need to make the impetus to go and talk to your sales team or your engineering team or your marketing team to make things happen. And often you're spending a lot of time in meetings, but there's someone in there that's saying, I can help you by you saying, I have this problem, saying, oh, let me introduce you to so-and-so, I can solve that for you. Right. Having someone like that in your company would. And another thing I think is always kind of, as I mentioned, is having a mentor outside too, your company. It's always something that's great. Like if you can say, hey, how do you solve this problem in your, and if you could sort of share that, get someone that could give you a different perspective on the way to share it, I think that's great. I think when I started a long time ago, there weren't these great resources like now, like YouTube and Find the Product and Product School. There's a lot of resources out there now where you can hear firsthand about how different people, different product managers or different organizations solve those different problems. So I think those, finding a mentor and then also looking into resources. There's some great books out there as well. The other thing I think is, especially in your situation now where you're not working, is I think when I work with a lot of companies, a lot of startups, I think as a product manager, you tend to get caught up in the why and how you build things.
Right.
And you tend to forget about the experience of the user. And so what I do with a lot of the companies that I work with is, we'll pick a persona of someone.
Yeah.
And then I'll walk through the experience with them. They've been building this product for, a year or two or whatever. But when we do that and say, hey, okay, you're not the CEO, you're not the CPO, or you're not the product owner. You're just the user.
Right.
Let's take a look at your product with fresh view. You see something completely different. And you're like, whoa, this is silly. We shouldn't be doing this. We should be doing this. Or, hey, we have all this information that we're not giving these users. Why don't we make it a lot more accessible? That's something that I try and do with myself whenever I'm working on a product. But really, it's just step away from the day-to-day of, how's that user story going along? And my roadmap to hey, what's the experience right now?
So I'm also a scuba diving instructor in my free time, and I've started a website where people can sign up and join our events. And I recently installed something called Hotjar, where it'll record the experience of the user, see where they click and things like that. And I will admit that's very insightful because if you're the one that makes it and you go, oh, okay, this is how it works, it's perfect. And then you watch someone for half an hour clicking things that aren't clickable, and you're like, oh, that's very insightful as to, okay, that's how it's not working.
Yeah.
I think that makes a really good point. Where I worked before Mercari was Rakuten, and there are times when you have really great motivation to work on great products, and there's other times where you do become a little bit insulated to the end user, and you deal with internal stakeholders to say, hey, let's build this, rather than focusing on ultimately the end customer, which benefits not only the customer, but then the organization as a whole.
Yep, I definitely agree. And then I guess the last bit of advice is, as I mentioned earlier, you're, as a product owner, you're responsible for the product. And if you feel that your product can do better in any sort of business, sort of different sort of silo of your business, I would go and talk to them. So I
find that I think that's really good advice. Tying in get a mentor, and also don't be afraid to just reach out to people and say, hey, I think this can be done better. This is why. Those are two pieces of advice that go together really well, because I never thought of product manager as a solitary role because you spend all of your day in meetings and you're talking to so many people, so it doesn't feel solitary. But I think what you say makes sense, is you're the only one wearing that badge when you're trying to conduct your day-to-day. And so having a mentor, and especially carrying that sense of ownership to the mentor and saying, hey, this is the problem that I've noticed, but I kind of don't know the next steps forward, and getting advice there. I think that is incredible advice for anyone in any position. No, really cool. Really cool. I think we can start wrapping up the interview, but I wanted to ask, for someone who watches this and they wanted to get a little bit more information about you and what you do, where can they look?
Yes, for sure. Yeah, please, you can follow me on Twitter, or there's also DCM. You can reach out to myself at DCM if you have any great business ideas, or just want to talk about what it's like to work at a startup, or to start a startup, or what it's like being in venture capital. I'd be happy to talk to anyone or answer any questions.
Does DCM also do, if someone has an idea, but do you also help them do sort of not user research, but product discovery?
For sure. So I think that's it. We have office hours.
Okay.
Where you can come in and talk to us. We also, I work on a program called the DCM Atlas.
Okay.
Which is a program where if you have an idea of a business and we think together that that's a great idea, then we will invest in the company. And then, so we spend 6 months working with you on taking that idea to finding the product market fit, and then helping you sort of actually, hopefully, start building that product.
Right.
And so that's a 6 month program that we're just wrapping up right now, but we're also going to do again next year as well. So we'll probably be opening up applications for our DCM Atlas program probably within the next couple months. So if anyone has
So I was going to say, so that's an opportunity for someone with an idea to come to you and say, hey, I think this has potential.
Yep.
What do you think? And then if I imagine it's sort of you pick certain candidates out of the pool and say, hey, we're going to take this through your 6 month program.
Yep. So what we do during that 6 month program is that we invest 400 like yen, so roughly like $300,000. Yeah.
40 million yen. Is that right?
40 million yen. That's right. To help you start your business. And then we will work with you for 8% of the equity. So obviously we invest in the company as well, but we also work with you to help you build that product. So it's a great program that we're doing here in Tokyo. Yeah, we hope that you get a lot of more submissions.
I mean, that sounds incredible because especially when you have so many bureaucratic sort of limitations and you don't know where to go forward, having an opportunity to share it, like this is an idea that I believe in based on maybe the research that I've done or the anecdotes that I've experienced, and I want to do something about it. And you giving people the tools to chase after that problem, I think that's incredible work.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very proud of the program, and we're going to continue it. So we're excited to have much more submissions come into the program.
I mean, especially as a product manager, that sounds really exciting. Like these are the problems. Okay, how do we run with that? But then also you're not building for the sake of building, because you also have a 6 month time frame and you're trying to make sure that you're addressing a specific audience. I'd love to see sort of how the applications go. I'll share it here and also share it around and see if anyone's interested.
Yeah, it's application is pretty straightforward in that, obviously because we're not requiring that you have a pitch deck per se.
Right.
But if you have that idea, as long as you have a way of conveying that information and what the business needs are, we'd love to hear about it. We can grow. And like, for example, some of the companies that I mentioned, like Free, where really it was the co-founders had an idea. It's like, hey, let's make the Intuit of Japan.
Right.
And from there, it's like, okay, so what's the product market fit for Japan if you're going to build that? And they actually went away from that in a way, right? Because it's not a consumer application. It's a B2B application. Because after together with DCM, we talked about what's the real need in Japan, and we started actually what its business is. So that's
B also counts sole proprietors, and I don't know like from the outside, but I imagine sole proprietors also makes a very big part of those who use Free, or is it more the mid-size like 21 to 50?
So when I meant B2B is that for your business, whether you're a sole proprietor.
Oh, I see. Okay, all right.
Whereas like your the tax, like the 1099 or whatever that you have to do.
Yes.
You don't do that with Free. That would still do that.
Right.
That's what I meant by it. Because TurboTax really is, so there's a consumer.
It's to help you file your tax. To be fair, it helps if you're employed in Japan that like Japan's HR will do that for you. That's kind of nice. I mean, especially for someone who can't read Japanese, it's like, you do it.
Yeah, it is. It's great. The handholding for stuff like that is great.
All right. Well, thank you. I think we can end the interview here.
All right. So
I will say this is the first time I've done one of these interviews.
You did an amazing job. I think it was fantastic.
Okay, I will say, because the questions that I sent you at the beginning, they weren't very thorough, but I really appreciate the chance to learn. And I really just want to meet you and have a coffee at some point. I think we're both trying to do similar things. And I'm currently on paternity leave, but as soon as I'm done, which will be in July, then I hope to have the opportunity to connect with you finally in person.
For sure.
I tried to start this because I want to learn. And I think this is a great opportunity to learn, but also I want to try share it with us because, like you said, the product management knowledge is very much based in English, but the annoying thing there is it's also very much based in a Euro US centric sort of perspective. And a lot gets lost when trying to transition that into Japan. And so that's kind of the target that I'm trying to solve, especially navigating speak Japanese enough.
Yeah,
So
no, I think that's great. I think the work you're doing is fantastic, and love to see you support it, and be a part of any sort of, if I can help in any way, definitely reach out.
Thank you. Well, then, thank you very much for your time.
All right, great.
All
Thank
right.
you, Jason.
Thank you, Ken.
Cheers. Bye.